Some of you have been asking what I would recommend looking for in a good watercolor pencil. And after sharing my thoughts with you, I discovered some updates to my answer. Recently, one of my viewers completed this tutorial, first using inexpensive watercolor paper, and then again using Arch watercolor paper. And the results were completely different. And that was such a good reminder to me that sometimes the paper matters even more than the pencils themselves. Welcome to Sunlit Brushstrokes. My name is Jessica, and I'm excited to share my personal experiences with watercolor pencils, but also what my viewers are discovering. To be honest, I haven't personally used too many inexpensive watercolor pencils, but I want to share with you what to look for in a good watercolor pencil, as well as how to get the best results with the ones you already have. To start, I want to show you why lower quality pencils could be an issue, and that is they have more filler. And since I don't really have much for inexpensive watercolor pencils on hand, I'm going to be demonstrating using regular colored pencils as an example, where the lower quality pencil will have more binder and the higher quality will have more pigment. So I'm just going to scribble on the black paper because the black paper really shows this well. So that green, and look at the tips of these, they almost look the same. And when I scribble on the black paper, with the higher quality pencil, the color shows up so much better. It's a softer lead, whereas the cheaper ones are generally harder lead. And there's just, like I say, more pigment, which means more vibrant colors. And so, how do you decide this with watercolor pencils? The first way I would recommend testing your watercolor pencils is to do a swatch on quality paper. Like I say, watercolor pencils can have filler, but as one of my subscribers recently shared with me, when she switched papers, she got entirely different results using the same inexpensive pencils. And then if the paper isn't making enough of a difference, try your local art store. If they allow you to test open stock pencils there, you can experiment and see what pencils you like the best. And then it's really helpful to have a water brush pen for testing because you want to check what color you're actually going to get when you add water. So you can start by adding water just outside your little swatch and then kind of blend into the swatch, and you can see how intensely vibrant those colors are. They're just beautiful. And squeeze a little more water. You can see the full gorgeous range I'm getting there. Let's do the same thing with this pink. And you can see why you'd want to test your watercolor pencil swatches with some water. It does make a difference. And yes, having paper towel will also help. You can wash your brush pen off, or at least wipe it on your paper towel, and that's going to allow you to get your brush clean before you do your next swatch. So you can see how vibrant and intense these particular pencils are. So I would recommend, if you can go to an art store and look for open stock pencils, that's a great way to test. But another option would be just looking online. You can watch YouTube videos of brand comparisons. The other thing is, if you see an artist using watercolor pencils and you like their work, there's a good chance that the pencils they're using are going to be ones that you like as well. So that's another thing. Just check around online and see what reviews are out there, see what work is being done with watercolor pencils. The good news is you don't need a huge variety of pencils to get started. Where I would say to start with is your primaries, your secondaries, and your tertiaries. So you're going to want a nice primary yellow, a magenta, and a nice primary blue. And then you can come in and fill it in with your secondary and tertiary colors as well. If you want to learn more about primary, secondary, and tertiary colors, I'll include a link to the video where I created this color wheel. But the good news is that you can also do a little bit of color mixing. If you have a primary color, such as a yellow, a secondary color, such as your orange, you can mix those two to create the color that's in between that we call a tertiary color. And I'm just going to show you that quick on this swatch of paper. So I have my yellow, and then I'm coming over it with a light layer of orange. And I'm going to blend those and see if I can't achieve the same color that I'm getting with this yellow-orange. So I'm going to put a little bit more of my orange on top to kind of get a little closer. And you never really know with watercolor pencil exactly what you're getting until you add water. So let's do that quickly and see what we get. Pretty close. And so you can see that you can actually get by with fewer colors as long as you have your primaries. And I would recommend secondaries. You can mix a red and a yellow to make these as well. It just gets a little more tedious to get the exact right amount of your red on top of your yellow to get this same orange. So it's a great idea if you can have your primaries, your yellow, magenta, and blue, plus your secondaries, which are orange, purple, and green. And then if you're able to fill in with these tertiary watercolor pencils, that's a nice bonus as well. It's going to save you from having to do as much color mixing. Once you have some primary and secondary colors, you'll want to consider adding some neutral tones as well. It's easy to mix these colors if you're using regular watercolor, but with watercolor pencil, it is kind of nice to have some of these colors already there for you. And the ones I enjoy using are actually the very darkest colors. And so I'm going to show you a quick swatch of some of them so that you can see what I'm talking about. So here is a kind of a neutral or muddy yellow, orange, red. This is kind of a brownish red, purple, indigo, and dark green. The exact names of these pencils are light yellow ochre, terracotta, India red, caput mortuum, red violet, dark indigo, pine green. And actually that green is a little bit more on the primary side, so I'm leaning towards these more earthy greens. Chrome green oxide and chromium green opaque. And because I actually prefer to use neutral or olive greens more than bright intense greens, I use these two quite a lot. And so that's another thing to know. If you like certain dull colors, or if you happen to really love a certain color that you see when you're at the art store, and you know that that's a color you're going to use a lot, that's a perfect time to just invest in 1, 2, or 3 other colors. I find the colors I use the most out of these neutrals are these 3 here, and the neutral greens down here. And I also especially enjoy this dark purple and indigo. I use these quite a lot because they're really nice in shadows. In my most recent tutorial of this watercolor pencil flower, you can see I clearly used some neutral colors in the flower center, but I did use a little bit of it as well when I wanted to create my deepest, darkest shadows towards the center parts of these petals. And honestly, I do lean into those colors a lot when I want to do shadows. If you're interested in following along with how I did this flower step by step, you can find the full-length tutorial in my Etsy shop, along with a traceable outline. I'll include a link for that in the description below. One of the things with the larger sets of watercolor pencils is that you can end up with a lot of pastel colors, and I have quite a few here in another brand, but I'm going to show you why you don't need them, and actually why I don't even recommend them. I'm going ahead and using a pastel color and then going in with a darker color that's kind of the same hue, and I'm just scribbling a little bit of each of these colors onto a cheap piece of watercolor paper. So you can see I've got 2 greens, a peach and an orange, a light blue and a deeper blue, a light purple and a deeper purple, a light pink and a deeper pink. Now let me show you what happens when I wet them. So I've got my water here, and I'm going to come in and do the same thing I did before. I'm wetting the paper leading up to that swatch of color, and then I'm just using a circular motion to blend that color back into my water. So that's my lightest green. Let's do the same thing with this green, and you're going to see that I end up having way more options and variety here by using that darker color and just adding more water. I really don't need that light green, do I? So let's just carry on down the page, adding some water, and you can immediately see, rather than requiring a pastel colored pencil, I can use a more intense, vibrant color and just add more water and stretch that color so much further. Sometimes the cheaper watercolor pencils behave a little bit more like those pastel colors did. They just don't stretch as far. And so when you invest in a color that has more pigment, it turns out to be so much more versatile. I pretty much never use pastel color in my watercolor pencil work. Not only because they don't have as much pigment, but they also contain a little bit of like white pigment. And sometimes whites can end up muddying up your work. It's a color you have to really respect. And I think there's a time and a place for adding a pastel color at the end of your work. Here you can see that I used a tiny, tiny touch of white to bring the highlight back into this teddy bear's eyes. But at this point in my art journey, I hardly ever pick up pastel colors, and very rarely will I pick up that white. Now, if you're working on a toned surface like black watercolor paper, or maybe something that's not white, most of the time I just use regular white watercolor paper. But if you're doing these on another surface, that might be a time to consider using pastel colors, or else use them at the very end for your final touches, because they could contribute to more of a chalkiness if you use them in the early stages of your painting. Now, I made the decision to use these Faber-Castell pencils on my channel because they seem to be readily available. When I first started my channel, you'll probably notice I was using these Staedtler watercolor pencils. These are the Karat Aquarelle, and I really like them because that's actually the brand recommended in a watercolor pencil course I took years ago. But the reason I switched is because it seems that the open stock is no longer available, at least not in my local art store. And if you have a brand that doesn't provide open stock pencils, it means when you run out of a color, you can't replace it without buying an entire new set of pencils, which can be disappointing. I still really like this brand and I'll use it in my personal work, but I'm in the process of switching over to the Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer as my preferred teaching pencil because they are so available and they're of such a high quality. And because you can buy individual pencils, either as you run out or if you want to add to the pencils you already have. So maybe you already have a nice set of watercolor pencils, you can just buy 1, 2, 3, however many pencils you want to kind of flesh that set out a little bit. I realize these aren't the only pencils that are open stock, and so if you can find a quality pencil that you like, either at your local art store or online that has good reviews, that could be a really good choice. Now, besides the Albrecht Dürer watercolor pencils by Faber-Castell, you can get the Derwent watercolor pencils open stock, as well as Caran d'Ache. I don't have a lot of experience with this brand, so if you are interested, I would recommend looking up some reviews more about it and see if that's the right brand for you. I've used the Derwent a little bit, but currently I am leaning towards these Faber-Castell pencils. And so at this point, that's what you're going to see me using on the channel. The other thing that you can do is to combine brands of watercolor pencils. Maybe you find some colors that you like open stock in one brand, you can go ahead and add those to the pencils you're already using. The only cautions I have with this is to just be aware of watercolor pencils that have different properties. One of those brands is Inktense. I have not used Inktense pencils, but I know a number of you happen to own them. And rather than being a pigment pencil, which is what most of these watercolor pencils are, Inktense are an ink-based pencil. They can end up being a little more permanent when you use them. And so I would love to know, have some of you mixed regular watercolor pencils and Inktense together? Does that work? Or do you prefer to keep your pigment watercolor pencils separate? And the other thing I'd be careful about is using water-soluble graphite at the same time as a watercolor pencil. It can be done. I've seen other artists using water-soluble graphite either in watercolor work or maybe watercolor pencil work. You just have to be aware that can also create mud for you in a quick hurry. And so just be careful if you're using a brand that has graphite. I know there's a brand that is a kind of a blend of graphite and colored pencil. That's another time you want to just be careful if you're using something like that and mixing them into your regular watercolor pencil, that you're aware of the muddiness that could occur. Otherwise, I feel like you can kind of get away with using more than one brand at a time. I feel like one of the downsides to these pencils though is the fact they have a wider barrel and you need a wider pencil sharpener. This one by Staedtler has 2 sizes and you can use that larger hole for these pencils. And the nice thing about a Staedtler sharpener is that you can also get a tub for them. This is a single hole tub because I use them on my regular colored pencils and regular graphite pencils. But what you can do is when you open it, if you find that it eventually gets dull, see if you look in this side here, you can see those screws. You can unscrew those and pop this section off and replace just the pencil sharpener with a new one. And so you can get the double hole tub that you could put this into if you want a pencil sharpener that has the double hole plus a tub. And like I say, the nice thing is you can replace this if it gets dull. What I've been doing recently is just using a small container and just sharpening over it. But if you want to travel with your watercolor pencils, you probably want to consider investing in the double tub and then just replace the inside of it as you need to. Another thing to be aware of is the quality of paper you work on. This particular piece of paper, the swatches were done on a piece of Canson XL, which is a cheaper paper and it doesn't have as much texture. When you work on a quality paper like Arches 100% cotton, and this is cold press, you'll get more vibrancy. You do have to take a little more time to blend your colors if you want to get them to blend out perfectly. But for the intermediate watercolor pencil projects that I have done so far on this channel, I have used Arches 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. Some of my earlier projects were done on Canson XL, which is proof that you can use a cheaper paper if that's what you have available to you. But if you want to do a lot of layering and get more intense color, you'll want to invest in a higher quality cotton paper. And for my brushes, I really do like the Simply Simmons because they are a firmer synthetic brush. They work really, really well for blending watercolor pencil. A softer brush like these Artegria almost hold too much water and they're a little soft for getting that real blended effect. And so I would recommend a slightly firmer synthetic brush. Here's a quick swatch of some of the more vibrant watercolor pencils that I have. If you would like to build a palette similar to mine, I have light cadmium yellow, dark cadmium yellow, and I've also given some variation on this side. So if you prefer something that's a little bit more gold or rich, you could try dark chrome yellow, orange glaze, pale geranium lake. Let me spread that out a little so you can see the range of values that you can get from each color. That's better. This one is Scarlet Lake, which is a little bit oranger. This is pink carmine, but I also really like this middle purple pink. It's almost more on the mauve side. This one is called Crimson, actually. It looks pretty purple, but that's the name of that one. But I also like this magenta. It almost could fit in with the neutral colors. For my purple, this is Delft Blue, but I might consider getting a more purpley looking purple in the future, such as violet. This is Phthalo Blue, Cobalt Blue Greenish. I haven't filled this set in yet with anything in the turquoise color, but I may consider a helio turquoise or a cobalt green. I'm planning to create some swatches next time I go to the art store, and I'll let you know what I decide. This is Pine Green, Earth Green Yellowish, but May Green is very similar. I'll include a list with the names and numbers in the description below for those who are interested. Since this is such a nice deep color, I decided to just add it to my neutral color swatch as well, just so you can get a feel for how that kind of works with the neutral colors, because this one does make a gorgeous shadow color. And because you can see it dries a little bit dull, it actually probably could work well as part of my neutral palette. So as a recap, choose quality over quantity. You can test this yourself or look online for reviews. If you would like a limited number of pencils that still are incredibly versatile, choose primary, secondary, and tertiary colors, along with some neutrals. Take advantage of brands that sell open stock pencils, and don't be afraid to use multiple brands together. I'd love to know in the comment section, what color pencil brand do you enjoy using? Do you have any you'd recommend? Or maybe some that you regret buying? If you enjoyed today's video, you'll want to check out my watercolor playlist, where you can find watercolor pencil tutorials for beginners and intermediate level students. In the meantime, I hope this discussion on color has brought a little taste of God's peace into your watercolor pencil shopping, and that it's inspired you to continue enjoying your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye!